Some machines outlive the men who built them, and some don't. This is the story of Gerald Tatum. Third-generation corn farmer, 61 years old, Hays County, Nebraska. Gerald knew every sound his combine made, every rattle, every hum, every groan of metal under load. He'd driven that machine for 26 years, and when something went wrong, he heard it before the sensors did. In the fall of 2023, Gerald heard something he didn't recognize. He told the dealer what he thought it was. The dealer laughed. He told the engineers what he thought it was. They walked away. Gerald fixed it himself. 3 weeks later, 40 acres of corn were burning, and everything his family had built for 70 years was gone. The Tatum farm sat 11 miles outside of Hays Center, Nebraska. It's a town so small, the post office and the feed store and the church shared a parking lot. Gerald's grandfather, Earl Tatum, bought the land in 1952. 320 acres, paid for in cash. Cash Earl had saved working oil rigs in Oklahoma, 16-hour days, 100-degree heat, because he'd grown up in the Dust Bowl, and he swore that if he ever owned land, he would hold on to it until the dirt buried him. He did. Earl died in 1979, left the farm to Gerald's father, Leonard. Leonard was a quiet man. He didn't talk much about pride or legacy. He just worked, sunup to sundown, 6 days a week, 30 years straight. He added another 160 acres in 1985, paid off the mortgage in 1994. And in 1998, he handed the whole operation to his son Gerald. The day he signed the deed over, Leonard said only one thing: "Don't let anybody take this from you." Gerald didn't plan to. Gerald married Linda, his high school sweetheart. She'd grown up on a wheat farm 2 counties over. She knew what the life meant. She knew the silence at the dinner table during bad years. She knew the prayer before every planting. She knew that the farm didn't care about your plans. You bent to its rhythm, or you broke. They had 2 children, a daughter, Megan, who became a nurse in Omaha, and a son, Tyler, who stayed. Tyler stayed through high school when his friends were leaving for Lincoln or Kansas City. He stayed through community college. He married Carrie in 2018. He moved into the old farmhand cottage a quarter mile from the main house. Tyler was supposed to be the 4th generation. That was the plan. And at the center of that plan was a machine, a 1998 John Deere 9610 combine. Gerald bought it the same year Leonard handed over the farm. By 2023, that combine was 26 years old, over 9,000 hours on the engine, paid off since 2006. It had survived hailstorms, mud seasons, a lightning strike in 2011, a fuel line rupture in 2017 that Gerald fixed with a hose clamp and a prayer at 2 in the morning during peak harvest. 500,000 bushels of corn. That's what that machine had harvested, and Gerald knew it like he knew his own hands. He knew the slight hesitation in the hydrostatic drive when the oil was low. He knew the way the header rattled when one of the wobble boxes was going. He knew the pitch of the rotor at full load versus half load versus running empty. When something was wrong with that combine, Gerald heard it before the sensors did. And in September 2023, something was wrong. It started during the 2nd week of harvest. Gerald was running the south field. 280 acres of corn, planted late because of a wet spring. The yields looked average. Not great, not terrible, but corn prices were down. Fuel was up. The operating loan was heavier than usual. It wasn't a crisis year, but it wasn't a comfortable one either. Tyler was running the grain cart. Carrie was managing the books. Linda was calling the elevator, checking moisture levels, keeping the trucks on schedule. A farm family during harvest is a machine itself. Everyone has a role. Everyone has a rhythm. Gerald's rhythm was that combine. And on September 14th, just after noon, the rhythm broke. A sound, high-pitched, faint, coming from somewhere inside the rotor housing. Gerald stopped, killed the header, let the engine idle, listened. There was a whine, almost like metal on metal, but not quite. More like a bearing starting to sing. He'd heard that exact sound before, back in 2009, a bearing in the feeder house. Same pitch, same location in the sound. That thin, high frequency that sits right behind your teeth when you're standing next to a machine that's trying to tell you something. Gerald called Tyler on the radio. Shut down for lunch. I need to look at something. That afternoon, he pulled the access panels, inspected everything he could reach without a full teardown. No metal shavings in the oil, no visible damage, but the sound was there, faint, persistent. He was almost certain rotor bearings. Not a cheap fix, but not catastrophic either. A few $1,000s in parts. A weekend of labor. He'd done this job before, back in 2012 with his father's help. But Gerald hadn't dealt with a dealership in years. The local John Deere dealer, Harmon Equipment, had been family-owned for 4 decades. Old man Harmon knew every farmer in the county by name. He'd extend credit in bad years. Knock a few hundred off a parts order when times were tight. Never once tried to upsell a farmer who didn't need it. But Harmon had retired in 2019, sold to a regional chain out of Omaha. New management, new sales targets, new pressure to move equipment. The place was now called Prairie AG Solutions. Gerald drove there on September 15th, told the service manager, a man named Cole Driggs, mid-30s, clean hands, polo shirt, told him exactly what he thought was wrong. Cole Driggs listened. Then he smiled. Mr. Tatum, that machine is 26 years old. It could be anything. I'd recommend a full diagnostic. The engineers came the next day. 2 of them. Laptops, diagnostic cables, clipboards. They spent 4 hours with the machine. Their report came back 2 days later. It wasn't the bearings, they said. It was the entire rotor assembly. Worn beyond safe operation. Full replacement recommended. Total cost, $47,312. Or, Cole Driggs suggested, Gerald could consider trading up. A new S780 combine. Financing available. With trade-in and a leaseback program. Just $189,000, spread over 7 years. Gerald stared at the paper. It's the bearings, he said. Cole Driggs shook his head. Our engineers ran a full diagnostic, Mr. Tatum. The data says otherwise. I've been running that machine for 26 years. I know what a bearing sounds like. With respect, the data says otherwise. Gerald asked to see the data, all 12 pages of it. He read it that night. Most of it was jargon, but on page 9, he found what he was looking for. The vibration analysis of the rotor housing showed a frequency pattern consistent with bearing wear. It was the bearings. They had the data, and they'd still told him to replace the whole assembly. Gerald went back the next morning, showed Cole the page, pointed at the frequency chart. That's bearing wear. Your own report shows it. Cole didn't even look at the page. Mr. Tatum, I understand you've been doing this a long time, but these machines are more complex than they used to be. The responsible thing, the safe thing, is a full replacement or an upgrade. I can get you into that S780 by end of the week. Gerald left without a word. That night, he sat on the porch with Linda. The fields were dark. The air had that September edge, the first hint that summer was letting go. They laughed at me, he said. Not out loud, but in the way they talked, like I was some old fool who didn't know his own machine. Linda was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to do? Fix it myself. Gerald called Mel Stover the next morning. Mel was 74 years old, retired. He'd been a John Deere mechanic for 43 years, back when mechanics still knew how to rebuild an engine without a diagnostic computer. He'd worked on Gerald's combine a dozen times over the years, until the arthritis in his hands got too bad and he hung up his wrenches in 2018. Gerald explained everything. The sound, the dealer, the engineers, the $47,000 estimate. The page in the report that showed it was just the bearings. Mel laughed, not at Gerald, at the estimate. $47,000 to replace a rotor assembly on a 9610? That machine doesn't even have a rotor assembly that costs that much. They're padding it with labor and upsell. You're right. It's the bearings. Can you help me fix it? Mel was quiet for a moment. My hands aren't what they used to be, but I can walk you through it. You do the wrenching. I'll do the thinking. They started that Saturday. Gerald ordered the bearings online. $1,847 for the full set. Mel came out every morning, sat on a bucket, and told Gerald which bolts to pull, which seals to check, which torque specs to use. For days of work. On Wednesday morning, Gerald put the combine back together, started the engine, let idle, listened. No whine. He engaged the rotor, let it spin up. Nothing. Clean. Smooth. Mel grinned from his bucket. What did I tell you? $47,000, my ass. Gerald called Linda on the radio. We're back in business. That afternoon, he ran the combine for 6 hours straight. It sounded better than it had in years. The header was smooth. The rotor was quiet. The whole machine felt tight. Responsive. Alive. He thought about driving to Prairie AG Solutions and dropping those old bearings on Cole Drigg's desk. He didn't, but he thought about it. For 3 weeks, the combine ran perfectly. The yield came in better than expected. Corn prices ticked up. Tyler and Carrie announced they were expecting their first child, due in April. For 3 weeks, it felt like Gerald had one. Then came October 7th. It was a clear day, temperatures in the low 50s, light wind from the northwest. Perfect harvest weather. Gerald was running the west field, the last big push before the season ended. Tyler was hauling grain to the elevator. Linda was in town. Carrie was at the house. Gerald was alone. At 2:17 in the afternoon, the combine shuddered. Not a sound this time. A feeling, a vibration that ran through the frame like a shiver. Gerald slowed, checked the monitors. No warning lights, no error codes. Everything looked normal. He kept running. 2 minutes later, he smelled smoke. He killed the engine, jumped out of the cab, ran to the back of the machine. Flames. Not a smolder, not a small fire. Full flames, fed by hydraulic fluid and dry corn stalks, spreading faster than Gerald could take it in. He grabbed the fire extinguisher from the cab, emptied it into the engine bay. It wasn't enough. The fire was already into the electrical system, the fuel lines, the header. Gerald ran. He was 50 yards away when the fuel tank caught. The explosion wasn't dramatic, not like a movie, just a deep thump, a ball of orange, and a column of black smoke, rising straight up into the October sky. Gerald stood in the middle of his own field and watched his combine burn. And then the fire spread. The corn was dry, ready for harvest. Perfect moisture content, which also meant perfect fuel content. The flames jumped from the machine to the stalks, and within minutes, the west field was burning. Gerald called 911, called Tyler, called Linda. By the time the fire department arrived, 43 acres were gone. The combine was a charred skeleton. The corn was ash. Gerald didn't say a word. He stood at the edge of the burn line, covered in soot, and stared at what was left. The insurance adjuster came 3 days later. He took photos. He took notes. He listened to everything Gerald told him. Then he asked, "You did the repair yourself?" With help. Mel Stover, retired mechanic. Not a currently certified John Deere technician, Gerald felt something cold settle in his stomach. A week later, the insurance company sent their own engineers. They pulled apart what remained of the combine, ran their own analysis. Their conclusion, the fire started in the engine's turbocharger. A seal had failed, spraying oil onto hot exhaust components. The turbo had been running outside normal parameters, possibly for months. Gerald remembered the diagnostic report. The The 12 pages he'd read that night at the kitchen table. He'd focused on page 9, the bearings. He'd found what he was looking for, and he'd stopped looking. He dug out his copy. Page 11. Turbocharger. Elevated thermal signature. Recommend inspection. Possible seal degradation. The engineers had flagged it. Buried in 12 pages of upsells and inflated estimates, there had been one real warning. One true thing, and Gerald had missed it. Not because he didn't see it, but because by the time he reached page 11, he'd already decided they were lying about everything. The insurance company denied the claim. Non-certified repair. Failure to address a documented maintenance warning. Policy voided. The combine was gone. The coverage was gone. 43 acres of corn were gone. And the bank was calling. Tyler found out about the insurance denial before Gerald could tell him. He drove to the barn, and the argument that followed was the kind that only happens between people who love each other. You did what? I fixed the combine, like I've fixed it 100 times before. With a retired mechanic, without telling the insurance company. Dad, they had a warning in the report. You ignored it. They were trying to sell me a $50,000 repair I didn't need. I was right about the bearings, and wrong about the turbo. Gerald didn't answer, because Tyler was right, and that was worse than any words. Tyler paced. His boots echoed on the concrete floor of the barn. Carrie's pregnant, he said, quieter now. We're supposed to be building something here. For our family. For the next generation. And now what? We lose the harvest. We lose the combine. The insurance won't pay. The bank is calling. What am I supposed to tell my child someday about why there's no farm? Gerald didn't have an answer. I told you to get a second opinion, Tyler said. A real second opinion. Someone who could document everything properly. You wouldn't listen. I've been running this farm for 30 years. Then maybe you need your own son telling you. But you don't listen to me either. You never have. Tyler walked out, got in his truck, drove away. He didn't come back for 3 days. The operating loan was $187,000. Normally, the corn harvest would cover it and leave enough for winter expenses and spring planting. But with 43 acres lost and the combine uninsured, the farm was short. $94,000 short. The bank gave Gerald 60 days to show a viable plan for repayment, or they would begin foreclosure proceedings. 60 days. That's what 70 years of Tatum farming was worth. 60 days. Gerald spent the next week making phone calls. He called the dealer. They never called back. He called the insurance company to appeal. 4 to 6 months, they said. No guarantees. He called a lawyer. $15,000 just a file, with no promise of recovery. Money Gerald didn't have. He called his daughter Megan in Omaha. She cried. She offered $5,000. Everything she and her husband had saved for a kitchen renovation. Gerald said no. Then Linda got on the phone and said yes. It wasn't enough. Not even close. Tyler came back on October 22nd. He didn't apologize. Gerald didn't either. But Tyler was there in the barn when Gerald started making the list. The list of what they could sell. The old Ford pickup, the hay baler, the grain cart, and the backup combine, the one machine they still had that could run a harvest. Tyler looked at the list for a long time. If we sell the backup combine, we can never harvest again. Not next year. Not in a year. We'll hire a custom crew. Dad, Tyler's voice was exhausted. I don't know if there's anything left to figure out. Gerald looked at his son, saw the fear, the weight of a future that was slipping away, and he said the only thing he knew how to say. Your great-grandfather bought this land with cash he earned on oil rigs. He worked 16-hour days in 100-degree heat so he could own something that couldn't be taken from him. Your grandfather added to it. I have held on to it for 30 years, and I will not be the one who lets it go. Tyler didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. The equipment auction was held on December 3rd. Gerald sold the hay baler, the grain cart, the backup combine. $61,200. Enough to buy time, but not enough to fill the hole. The bank restructured the loan, gave Gerald 18 months, 3 profitable harvests to turn around. 3. Without a combine of his own, without a grain cart, without the machine that had made him a farmer. And then, in January, Tyler told Gerald he was moving to Lincoln. I got a job offer. AG equipment sales. Salary. Benefits. Carries due in April. I can't raise a child on hope. Gerald didn't argue. What could he say? Stay and inherit a debt? Stay and raise your family on maybe? Tyler left in February. He promised to come back for planting. He promised to help with harvest. But they both knew what it meant. The line was broken. The plan was over. The spring of 2024 was wet again. Gerald planted late. Hired a custom crew for harvest. They did fine work, but they didn't know the land. Didn't know which fields drained and which ones held water. Didn't know the 30 years of rhythm Gerald had learned by feel. The yield was average. The prices were down. The crew cost more than he'd budgeted. By December 2024, Gerald was behind again. In January 2025, the bank called for the last time. On March 14th, the Tatum farm was listed for auction. All 480 acres. The house Gerald's grandfather had built. The barn Gerald's father had expanded. The fields Gerald had worked since he was 16 years old. The auction was held on April 22nd. A corporate farming operation out of Iowa bought it all. The numbers were good on paper. Gerald walked away with over $400,000 after the bank took its share. Enough for a small house in Hayes Center. Enough to live on carefully. Enough to leave something for Megan and Tyler when he was gone. But not enough to mean anything. Not like that land had meant something. Gerald and Linda moved into a 3-bedroom ranch house on the edge of Hayes Center. Nice porch, small yard, no barn, no fields, no horizon line that belonged to him. Tyler came home for the auction. He stood next to his father and watched strangers walk the land, measuring it, appraising it, calculating what it was worth in dollars per acre. Neither of them said a word. Later, after the papers were signed and the keys were handed over, Tyler found his father sitting in the cab of the old Ford pickup. The one thing Gerald had refused to sell. The one machine he'd kept. "I'm sorry," Tyler said. Gerald shook his head. "I was right about the bearings." "I know, and I was wrong about everything else." Tyler didn't argue, because it was true. Gerald stared out the windshield at the fields that were no longer his. "Your great-grandfather told my father to take care of the land. My father told me. I was supposed to tell you. You still can. Tell you what, take care of something that's gone." Tyler opened the passenger door, sat down beside his father. "Tell me what it meant. Tell me what it felt like. Tell me, so I can tell my son someday, even if he never plants a seed in his life. The land's gone, Dad, but the story doesn't have to be." Gerald reached under the seat. He pulled out an old Bible, Earl's Bible, from the toolbox of his grandfather's tractor. He'd taken it before the auction, the only thing from the barn he couldn't leave behind. He handed it to Tyler. "Your great-grandfather put this in that toolbox in 1961, after a drought nearly broke him. He never told me what verses he marked. I never looked." Tyler opened it, turned the pages slowly, found a passage underlined in faded pencil. Ecclesiastes 3, verses 1 and 2. "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck up that which is planted." Tyler read it out loud. Gerald listened. And for the first time since the fire, he let himself cry. 3 generations built the Tatum farm. It wasn't one decision that destroyed it. It wasn't the fire alone. It wasn't the denied claim alone. It wasn't the pride alone. It was all of it together. The dealer who laughed, the engineers who walked away, the pride that stopped listening, the warning on page 11, the system that always rewarded replacement over repair, the margins that were always too thin, the prices that never kept pace with the costs, the weather that never cooperated, and the debt that never forgave. Gerald Tatum was right about the bearings, and he lost everything anyway. If you've lived a version of this story, I want to hear from you. Not in the comments to be clever, not to argue, but because some stories need to be witnessed by someone who understands them. Leave a comment. Tell me what you lost. Tell me what you saved. Tell me what your father told you about the land, or the machine, or the work that you've never forgotten. Some stories don't have happy endings, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be told.